Welcome to the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution and Civic Responsibility, an ongoing inquiry into the origin and evolution of the American government. The Executive Director for the Virtual Center is Dr. Bill O'Brien. And here he is, Dr. Bill O'Brien.
Thank you, Agnes, and welcome to a Wednesday edition of the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution and Civic Responsibility. Today is Wednesday. It is the 17th day of August in the year 2016. It is a beautiful day as we move into the latter portion of the summer. The heat in the country is intense, I know. We're anticipating from everything we're hearing that we're going to start getting a break in the heat and humidity that we've been having over the last week to 10 days. And as I look at the national news and see the wildfires in California, I mean, it's unbelievable when you watch the national news in the morning and they have a wildfire so close to Los Angeles and they say that it is 0% contained. The temperature is supposed to be 100 degrees today. The winds are high. They're in the midst of a 5-year drought. And it's very, very close to Los Angeles. I mean, this is frightening. And then, of course, you look at Louisiana, and they're dealing with 2 feet of rain in a 48-hour period, and the runoff, the overflow, and the aftermath of that. As the water recedes, it's all running further down from Baton Rouge. Baton Rouge is in Louisiana, but it's not right on the coast. And so consequently, the flooding in Baton Rouge as the water recedes is flowing further down towards the Gulf. And it's wiping out towns along the way between it and the Gulf of Mexico. So the nation is going through some horrendous things in terms of weather. We've had some severe weather here. Obviously, we had the flooding situation a month ago. That people here are still trying to recover from. It's kind of interesting that we're now beginning to get on our local news a deadline of next Wednesday, the 24th of August, as the last day to apply for flood assistance from FEMA. So basically, we're in the phase where those people are going to have to deal with what they have now, because there's not going to be much of an opportunity to get any more. And I can say from a very personal level, my wife has. I mentioned that she has a home, her family home, that was destroyed in this situation, and she has been able to get no help, no aid, FEMA or a Small Business Administration or anything else. So, in fact, as we do our program today, she's at one of our local banks in the region, securing a loan for purposes of tearing down her house because it has been condemned, and she has to pay to take it down. So it seems a little bit unfair. I mean, even the people from FEMA have said to her that she falls through the cracks because it wasn't her primary residence any longer. It used to be. She raised her children in it, so it has all sorts of emotional value to her. So it's been a tough hoe. I just admire the heck out of her because she's handled this like a trooper, and it's not easy. And when she tells me that she has a headache, or she can't sleep, or her stomach is a little bit upset, and I can understand why. Believe me, because mine is too. And I know that there are so many people that are so much worse off than we are. As I look at what's going on in Louisiana, it's amazing. It's just unbelievable to me, because when you reach a certain point in age, you can't rebuild. You can't go back. You have to go in the direction that you pointed in. And so when people get wiped out and lose everything they have in the whole world, and it's too late in life to start again, what do you do? And that's the situation that many folks are in. And I think all of us need to keep them in mind, frequently, because however bad things are, believe me, there are other people that are going through a lot worse. Anyway, but right now we have a beautiful day, although it is getting, warm as it has been each afternoon, for the last couple of weeks, but it's not as bad as as it has been. So I think we're going to get a little bit of a break for the rest of this week here. I hope that things are going well where you are, and I want to thank you for tuning in to today's program at the Virtual Center. I want to thank you for your continued support of this program and of the Head On Radio Network as well. I've received quite a few comments about our programs, especially yesterday's program. The entire program was devoted to the issue of the destruction of unions and the rise of Donald Trump. And I've received a number of comments on it. When the program is over and I reflect back on it, I begin to appreciate the fact that going in at the front end, I really didn't have as much appreciation for how serious this issue is as I do looking back on it once we completed the program. I guess one could say maybe I talked myself into believing that the situation is worse than I thought it was when I put the program together. But again, you know what you're going to deal with. But the fact of the matter is, as you begin dealing with it, one thing leads logically to another, and you find yourself having created a situation which is pretty dramatic. And I think that's what we've got here. I really think that this is a very, very significant and very important issue. And if it's okay with you, and if you don't mind, I would like to pursue this theme, this train of thought, a little bit further today. I don't want to go too far off into Never Never Land, but on the other hand, there are a number of things that continue to happen that it seemed to me are in part explained, at least, by some of the things we've been talking about yesterday. So I'd like to pursue this theme in a little bit more depth here today at the Virtual Center. I do encourage your input into the program. This is a conversation. It is intended to be a conversation, and by definition, a conversation seems to require at least two individuals in order to conform to the definition of conversation. So I'm throwing out a lot of ideas and perspectives and possibilities, and I'm trying as best I can to document some of this stuff. I don't want you to think that I'm just dreaming, just pulling it out of left field with no basis in reason or anything. And but at the same time, I would love to hear from you. I kind of guess that there are a number of points that have been made that are, to say the least, controversial. I've heard people talk about provocative and those other things, and I agree. I mean, these are extremely explosive ideas and concepts. And so, I expect that many people out there who have heard them and have taken time to reflect on them a bit would possibly have some things to say. And the point I would like to make is all of us, myself, not only myself, but the people who listen to our program, all of us would really appreciate hearing from you. I first of all apologize for the house phone in the back. I'm just going to let it ring. It may kick into voicemail, and you may hear that, but it'll be over in a moment. Our phone number is available for you to get on the air and share your thoughts or your ideas or concerns or whatever with us. The phone number is area code 304-663-4676. 304-663-4676. If you'd like to drop me an email and express yourself that way, I would love to hear from you. I would definitely welcome that way as well. And I will, if there's material or ideas or content in your email, which seems to be something that all of our listeners could benefit from hearing, I would maintain the option of sharing that with our people. I won't identify you unless you express an interest in me doing that. I wouldn't do that, but I really like to get the ideas out. So my email address is waobrien906 at gmail.com. That's waobrien, OBRIEN 906 at gmail.com. And I do call your attention to our Facebook page. Yesterday morning, early before we went on the air with yesterday's program, I put a posting on there about this issue of unions and the rise of Donald Trump, which was a little bit of a summation of what we had completed our Monday program with and what we were looking at as the lead story for the lead summary of what our program yesterday was going to be about. And I haven't added anything to Facebook since then. But I do believe that today's program, for the most part at least, will focus on kind of many of the same questions and many of the same issues. So I do encourage you to take advantage of our Facebook page and check out some of the postings that are there and feel comfortable in responding or commenting upon them, either on Facebook itself, and I think they provide all sorts of opportunities for you to do that. You can like, you can share, you can message directly to me. There are a number of ways you can comment on Facebook. You could also drop me an email at waobrien906 at gmail.com, or you can pick up the phone while we are on the air and call into the 304-663-4676 number. But the fact of the matter is, I think all of us would really appreciate hearing from you. And again, we know that if you take the idea and go to the trouble of communicating with us, it's because what you've got to say is something that all of us could benefit from. I don't want anyone to feel at all uncertain that that's true. Given the topics we're dealing with, and given the nature of the population who listens on a regular basis to these programs and considers these kinds of topics, we know for sure that what you have to contribute is something that all of us would benefit from hearing. So with that, I'd like to go into today's program a little bit. I'm not going to necessarily summarize yesterday's program because that would take a while. But I think it's going to, if you weren't with us yesterday, then what we were basically talking about is the irony that the very same people that would be represented in a situation, in a society in which labor unions were very strong and very vital, are the people who are supporting Donald Trump now that many prominent people, especially Republicans, and representatives of corporations and chambers of commerce and all of these people, have made it a policy, number one priority, to decimate labor unions. We talked a little bit about, at the beginning of the program yesterday, about right to work as kind of being the culmination, the latest facet of that attack. Many people believe that right to work, the success of right to work, and it has now become law in 26 of our states, that many people think that right to work might just be the beginning of the end of the viability of labor unions in our society, because it basically is legislation that makes it possible for people to work in an organized setting and not only not become a union member, but still experience or receive the benefits of union representation, even though you pay no dues or no fees. And the likelihood is that the very existence of that kind of situation is going to decimate what membership in labor unions is left. Because the thinking is that dues-paying members of unions will cease to be dues-paying members of unions when they realize that the people who aren't paying dues are getting the same representation they are and not paying anything for it. And once that happens, once dues-paying members begin to bail out, then unions will effectively lose their clout. And, of course, I would suggest that is the objective of Right to Work. They talk about it as a way to attract employers to states and to protect the workplace freedom of workers by making it possible for them to keep their jobs even though they don't want to belong to a union, and have dues taken from them and the dues expended on things that they don't necessarily support. All these other arguments that are used to justify Right to Work. But the issue that they don't talk about is, I think, the big one, and that is the extent to which Right to Work over time will decimate organized labor in this country. That seems to be the goal, the intent. Yesterday's program was based on the fact that the irony of that situation is that the people who would be members of unions, when and if unions remained vital in our society, are now the very same people that are flocking to Donald Trump. The uneducated or less educated, the white populations that have made up the membership in our labor unions, non-college, some of them non-high school, but mostly non-college, elements of our population. The very same people that the researchers and analysts tell us are most avid in their support for Donald Trump are the people that used to be reflected or represented in labor unions. And the fact of the matter is, one of the themes that we looked at yesterday was the extent to which labor unions play a role in our democratic society, in all democratic societies, that goes way beyond the issues of wages and benefits and working conditions. Critics of unions like to believe that that's all unions are about, is looking out for themselves, their own best interests, trying to find ways to negotiate higher wages for themselves and better working conditions and improved fringe benefits and all the rest of it. But the fact of the matter is, research tells us that labor unions perform many other functions in our society which are not related to wages and benefits and working conditions. That labor unions are major vehicles for educating their members on the political issues of the day, on what's going on politically. Labor unions become the vehicles which organize these people as participants in a political process which, if the unions participate, which they really do frequently, in other words, unions are very, very important in getting out the vote, in getting people to the polls. One of the pieces of research that I picked up in my reading, which I neglected to mention yesterday, but I think that it's very important, and that is that in 2008, in Barack Obama's first successful run for the presidency, his first term, there's a disconnect, obviously, between Barack Obama as the candidate of the Democratic Party for president and the predominantly white working class membership in labor unions. And there was serious concern during the campaign in 2008 as to whether union members would continue to support Barack Obama and the Democratic Party. And what happened during that campaign, many of you will remember this, I do, was that Donald Trumka of the UMW became very, very visible in his support for Barack Obama and his efforts to get the labor vote behind him. Obviously, it was successful because Obama won in 2008 and won again in 2012. So what that essentially means, it seems to me, is that Trumka was able to make the case to organize labor that if they didn't support Barack Obama, they were shooting themselves in the foot. They were voting against their own best interests. And so basically what he was successful in doing was getting labor to see that their best interests, no pun intended here, their best interests trumped their inclinations to not vote for an African American. And it was successful. And in 2012, the same thing occurred. The same scenario played itself out. And the research, and this is the point that I was going to make, the research that I've seen on the election of 2012 suggests that working class whites who were not union members tended to vote overwhelmingly for John McCain. But union members voted for Barack Obama. So clearly, the link between organized labor and the Democratic Party is a critical, vital element in understanding the role of unions in our political process, in our society at large. Basically, what unions do best is make the case to working people who would be inclined to go in a different direction, to not vote at all, for example, that they need to participate actively in the process, because that's the only way the process can work for them. And the fact of the matter is, the reality that unions members voted so overwhelmingly for Barack Obama, which at least on the surface seemed to be contrary to their priorities or their inclinations, would suggest that unions are playing a vital role in connecting the potentially disconnected to the process, to the system. It seems to me that if we were going to solve some of the racial issues in our society, then that also could be a model of the best ways to do that. In other words, finding ways to organize minorities for voting purposes. And we know, for example, in the projections coming right now, we know in the primaries, the Democratic primaries, how very, very strong was African American support for Hillary Clinton. And it was one of the major weaknesses of the Bernie Sanders campaign, was that he couldn't begin to touch Hillary Clinton's influence with black Americans. And the fact of the matter is, labor unions have been a vital factor in bringing these people into the process. And the nature of our republic, and this is the connection with the virtual center, of course. We spent a lot of time in previous months and years, actually, talking about the extent to which this republic depends on, absolutely must have, mass participation. The stability of this system is based on the willingness of the masses to buy into and participate in the process. There's one additional key factor that's associated with that. And I think it would be remiss not to get into it a little bit, and at least not to mention it, but even to develop it a little bit would seem to be most appropriate. If groups like organized labor are going to be successful in organizing members to participate in the process, then these members must know, not guess, but know, that the system will and can work for them if they do this. The word that you see thrown around all the time it's a very, very unique word. I know many people have seen it. It's the word efficacy, not efficiency. Efficiency is doing what you must do much faster and cheaper and more effectively and all that. That's what we mean by efficiency. But we're talking about efficacy. C-A-S-Y. C-A-S-Y. C-A-C-Y, I think, to be honest with you. But anyway, what efficacy means is that the process works. In other words, if people are going to participate in a process, it's because they have to believe that that process works for them. If it doesn't work for them, then obviously they won't participate. So if Donald Trump, for example, is going to be successful in encouraging working unionized labor to go to the polls and vote for Barack Obama, then that has to be because they believe, they know that Barack Obama's administration will do for them what's best for them. They have to know that there's a payoff, that there's a benefit. So basically then, what we have to consider is that in order for unions to play the kind of social and political role that unions have played in our society, beyond wages and benefits and working conditions, it's got to be because it works. And I guess the point that I'm trying to make is that the traditional link between organized labor and the Democratic Party in American politics that has been pretty much assumed for so many years, going all the way back to the New Deal and Roosevelt. And Roosevelt's, making collective bargaining a right, the right of union workers to organize and collective bargain. That kind of connection to the Democratic Party worked. When the Democrats were in control of government through and after the war, World War II, and into the 50s and 60s, and again, even though the 50s was the decade of Dwight D. Eisenhower and a Republican in the White House, the fact of the matter is Eisenhower was what we call a liberal Republican, and they don't exist anymore, pretty much. But the fact of the matter is there was a wing of the Democratic Party, the conservative wing, pretty much led by Taft and some others, that wanted to undo the New Deal benefits to organized labor that had come out of the New Deal legislation. But for the most part, over time, there was a general willingness among Republicans to accept the legitimacy of the right of organized labor to participate in the political process. So the fact of the matter is that the only way that this traditional linkage between the Democratic Party and organized labor could continue to exist was if it worked, if it paid off. And it obviously did. And of course, people talk fondly about the post-war period in the 50s and 60s when the middle class was dominant in this society. There were people, as a result of things like the GI Bill and the VA for buying homes, low down payment homes, financing mortgages for long term with low interest, and giving veterans special benefits, especially low interest rates, and all these things. It exploded home ownership in this country. It exploded membership in the middle class. We talked about this yesterday. And so basically all of this, which we look back upon as the good times for the middle class in our society, resulted in the most vibrant, dominant, visible, accessible middle class in the history of any society in the modern world. And of course, we know that has, for reasons we won't get into today, that all of those good times supposedly disappeared. And, for most people, and I'm one, they really signal the beginning of the end of those good times with the election of Ronald Reagan in 1980. And again, it's not all attributable to Reagan, but we remember very well that when Reagan broke the strike of the air traffic controllers and took this strong position against unions, that was the beginning of a process that has continued unabated since the 1980s. Until now, we have a situation where less than 1 in 10 working people is a member of a union. And so basically unions have been decimated. The fact of the matter is the people who are flocking to the Donald Trump campaign are low-educated, white, working people, low-skilled people whose jobs are being lost. The trade agreements, NAFTA and the threatened TPP and all of these things have caused these jobs to move. If you remember, first they moved from the north, from New England down into the south, because the South was not unionized. It was right to work. And then they closed up there and they moved overseas. And working people in states like North Carolina and South Carolina and other states were decimated as well, and were experiencing untoward unemployment among working people. These are the people that are flocking to Donald Trump because Donald Trump promises to bring back jobs, to bring back the good times, to get rid of all the foreigners that these people believe are taking their jobs, to fight all of the international trade agreements that are making it possible for their jobs to go overseas. And, many of the things that Donald Trump is talking about is appealing to the internal gut instincts of this group. And there is no union situation to offset this. And so the irony of the situations is the very people who are most worried about the candidacy of Donald Trump are the people who played a direct role in the decimation of unions in this society. It almost seems like a form of justice. But be that as it may, that's what our program yesterday, for the most part, focused upon and was about. I think the issue is extremely important. I think it's extremely important in a number of issues, and I'd like to focus on a couple of them today. One, and I don't think we did anything with this yesterday, and I just want to introduce it. I don't really know how far we could go with this, at this point. But I think it really deserves to be mentioned at least. And that is that there's a message or a lesson here for the leaders of organized labor. It seems to me that union leaders have missed a tremendous opportunity by not focusing on some of the positive benefits that unions perform and have performed in this society, other than direct benefits for their own members. In other words, unions have played a direct role in making the political process work in the society, getting out the vote, getting people who would be inclined not to vote to vote. One of the other issues or conclusions that seems to be obvious from this kind of a story, from this particular scenario, is the link between economic development, growth, and union membership, and the willingness of union members to be participants in the political process. We talked about efficacy. We talked about the fact that if union members are going to participate in the political process, it's got to be because there's a payoff for it. It's worthwhile for them to do that. And what that means is the system works for them. Obviously, if the system is going to work for them, it can only do that when the economy is strong. If the economy is weak and people are getting laid off in massive numbers, by definition, the unemployed begin to wonder whether the system really works for them or not. And if there isn't a turnaround, an economic turnaround in relatively short order, then these people are going to look for other alternatives besides playing the political game. In other words, if playing politics doesn't seem to be bringing any benefits to these people, then they'll look for alternatives. Donald Trump is such an alternative. He is promising solutions to problems that these people don't see coming from any place else. They don't see it coming from the establishment. They don't see it coming from Wall Street. They don't think it's coming from corporate executives. In other words, the idea that was really the basis of union success in this society, that the only way the system can work for them is if they organize and play a vital role in that political process, has stopped working for them. And so naturally they're looking for alternatives. And Donald Trump obviously offers such an alternative. What this seems then to suggest is that there's a direct link between economic growth, economic expansion, the health of the economy, and the ability of the political process to work. Let me even go further than that and make a statement as a truism. And that is that what we know as democracy, what we know as a democratic system, a system based on mass participation. We're not going to get into the details now of whether it's a democracy or whether it's a republic. We know that a democracy is majority rule, and we don't have that. We have elected representatives, and we've talked a lot about that. We know that. But in order for this kind of a political system to work, then it has to be tied directly to economic viability, economic strength. Translation: the success of democracy, of political democracy, is directly connected to the extent, to the viability or the strength of capitalism. Let me put it another way. Capitalism owes its vitality in large measure to democracy. And democracy, on the other hand, is dependent upon the success of capitalism. There's an interdependency between the two. And if you accept the fact that political democracy and all the shades of it is the preferred form of organizing our societies, then it's important to recognize the degree to which political democracy is linked to capitalism. Democracy can work only when capitalism works. Capitalism works best when everybody participates in it. And political democracy is built upon the idea of mass participation. So there's got to be a payoff. There's got to be an interdependency or a reciprocal relationship between the two. Yesterday, I mentioned the article, the August 12th article in the New York Times by Neil Gross, who really made the connection between unions and Donald Trump and the rise of Donald Trump. And one of the things that comes through in his article is the writing and the research of a sociologist who was very prominent in the late 20th century. In fact, in 1993, he was president of the American Sociological Association. His name is Seymour Martin Lipset, Lipset. Seymour Martin Lipset. I can remember when I was in college in the 1960s that there were an awful lot of books in political science and sociology that we used to read that were written by or co-edited by Seymour Martin Lipset. It's a name that I became very familiar with. I used to see it everywhere. It seemed like he wrote everything that was related to politics and economics. But in fact, that was his strength. And he was one of the nation's most noted political authorities in the area of sociology. And he conducted all sorts of research. In 1993, as president of the American Sociological Association, at its annual convention that year, Lipset, as president, delivered the keynote address to the convention. That keynote address is available on the internet. It's long. I printed it out. I've read it a couple of times in recent days. It prints out to 22 pages. In other words, it's a pretty long address. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this address because it doesn't pertain directly to what we're doing, but it applies to what we're doing. The title of Seymour Martin Lipset's address, at that time he was a sociologist at George Mason University in Washington, D.C. Then he went to the University of California at Berkeley, I believe. The title of his paper was The Social Requisites of Democracy Revisited. What he's basically talking about are the implications of democracy beyond the realm of just politics. Looking at the extent to which political democracy affects the way entire modern societies are organized. At the beginning of his paper, once it was published, he put this abstract or this paragraph telling people before they read it what they're going to be reading, what he thinks he did. And that I would like to share with you, because I think when you hear it, you'll be able to relate some of it to what we've been talking about. Lipset says the following in his abstract. In this paper, I discuss the factors and processes affecting the prospects for the institutionalization of democracy throughout the world. I survey cultural and economic variables, religious traditions, various electoral systems, the importance of a participatory civil society, and the methods through which political parties should be structured to maintain stability. I conclude that because new democracies have low levels of legitimacy, there is a need for considerable caution about the long-term prospects for their stability. In many countries during the 1980s and early 1990s, political democratization caused the breakdown of Political democratization occurred at the same time as profound economic crises. Such conditions have already caused the breakdown of democratization in a number of countries. To attain legitimacy, what new democracies need above all is efficacy, particularly in the economic arena, but also in the polity. If they can take the high road to economic development, they can keep their political houses in order. The opposite is true as well. Governments that defy the elementary laws of supply and demand will fail to develop and will not institutionalize genuinely democratic systems. Basically, what Lipset's research paper does is establish the connection in all modern democracies between economic development and the success of democracy itself. If the elements of democratic government, mass participation, civil justice, civic responsibility, commitment to the process, respect for rule of law, respect for freedoms like freedom of speech and freedom of press and freedom of assembly, protections against the arbitrary use of power, political power, for example, by government. If all of these things, individual rights in other words, if all of these things are going to work and be successful, if people, ordinary working people, are going to buy into these as priorities, it's got to be because they work. And so the fact of the matter is, what Lipset is saying, is when you try to impose a democratic system on a people or a culture that has never been democratic, has no cultural background, has no sense of commitment to the process, then the success of democracy in that environment becomes very, very questionable. And if it happens in the midst of economic crisis, when people can't find jobs, the whole system breaks down. So what Lipset does in his paper, and as I mentioned, I've read it a couple of times in the last few days. What Lipset does in his paper is look at one democracy after the other. The democracies in Africa and Latin America, Eastern Europe after the fall of the Iron Curtain in 1989, and all the rest of it. And what he finds is that a lot of these democracies didn't last. And the reason they didn't last is because they didn't have the kind of economic strength to sustain them. They hadn't been around long enough to build up a sense of legitimacy amongst people. And the fact that the economy was so weak and there weren't jobs and people were struggling then people had no problem abandoning their commitment to democracy, because from their perspective, all it was the latest effort to reorganize society in another way that isn't working for me. These people became ripe for dictators. They became ripe for people to come in, demagogues to come in and promise them answers for the problems that the political system couldn't deliver on. I would suggest to you that that is exactly the situation we are experiencing here in the United States in 2016. We have large numbers of working people who have been displaced, who are unemployed or woefully underemployed. They lost their jobs. They lost their livelihoods. They lost their retirement benefits. They lost their health benefits. What jobs they can get don't begin to match the jobs they lost. But more important, it's clear, becoming more and more clear all the time, that this is not temporary. These people have begun to realize, to recognize that their plight, their situation shows no signs of getting better because the jobs have left the country. They aren't coming back. Coal is dying. Despite the political leaders, the politicians who promised to bring coal back, and that's what Trump's doing. That's why Trump is so far ahead in the polls here in West Virginia. It's bogus. It can't happen. It's not that there won't be coal, but clearly there won't be coal at the level that there was coal in West Virginia for the last 100 years, when the entire economy was built upon it. That is not coming back. And the fact of the matter is there's nothing to replace it. The jobs that are out there, the career opportunities that are out there in the modern world, in the modern internet-driven technological world, require skills that these people don't have. Not only does it require skills that these people don't have, but the education system necessary to provide those skills can't do it either. The situation from the perspective of the people who are down is desperate. And all of the controls, all of the things that controlled and directed and provided hope for the future and etc. to these folks in the past have been decimated. And one of them, of course, is unions. So the fact of the matter is that the appeal of Donald Trump in this kind of environment is strong. And when he talks about building walls to keep out Mexicans and limiting the inflow of immigrants into the country and deporting 11 million people who are here illegally and banning Muslims in order to fight the possibility of terrorism, and looking at America first and making America great again, and all of these things, this has an absolutely impossible to counter appeal to people that don't see hope anywhere else. In the 1930s, it is not an accident that Adolf Hitler made it a priority to destroy the trade unions first. The only way that he could win the support of the working German people, of the German working class, is to destroy the trade unions because the unions were the workers' links to the system. And basically, in order to win their loyalty to him, he had to decimate the unions. So where and how did Hitler do that? He appealed to business. He appealed to small business. And the basis of his appeal was an attack on unions and how unions took away the freedom of workers and how unions made it impossible for business owners and employers to do business. How unions created impossible limitations and restrictions on how they ran their business. And he basically made destroying unions the basis of his appeal to business. And it worked. And once the unions were decimated, then the workers who would have been members of those unions had no choice but to look to Hitler and the party he headed for answers to the problems that they were experiencing, to life's problems. Because the system that they had been told could work for them didn't work anymore. The unions were gone. That's what we're talking about here. And how important this whole phenomenon is to the nature of the political process that we are in now and that we know. It seems to me to say an awful lot about the people who support Donald Trump. It seems to say an awful lot about the possible intent or motives of Donald Trump himself. It seems to open up a number of possibilities as to things that might be happening that we don't have any evidence yet. We're trying to get into the heads of people who aren't going to admit these things. But I would suggest to you, and I want to get into this in our second hour, I would suggest to you that in the 24 hours since we were last together here at the Virtual Center, there have been major changes in the Trump campaign. Trump has hired 2 new people to head up and manage his campaign. And while he hasn't dismissed, he has effectively reduced in authority Paul Manafort, who was his campaign manager, still is his official campaign manager, but his duties are being redefined. That's the news of the day. That's the lead story on this morning's news, is the shakeup in the Trump campaign. What I'd like to do in our second hour is begin, at least, by looking at those changes in the Trump campaign and looking at what they might mean in terms of what we've been talking about. Because I think that there are things going on in the last 24 that have gone on in the last 24 hours that make pretty much all of what we were talking about yesterday seem more realistic and more vital. When we did it yesterday, it was an abstract possibility. In the last 24 hours, that possibility seems to have begun to transition into reality. And so I'd like to basically begin there and look at it. And then I'd like to draw a couple of ideas or thoughts from the Seymour Martin Lipset piece. And then I'd like to share with you a very, very incisive paper that was brought to my attention by Horst on Facebook about an hour, 45 minutes before we went on the air. It deals with the media and Donald Trump. By the time we finish our program today, by the time we finish our broadcast week here at the Virtual Center, I think all of us are going to have enough to think about and chew on to last us from the end of our program today until we come back together again next Monday. So that's my goal. I hope that you will stay with us. We're going to pause for a short 5-minute break. It's exactly 2 p.m. It's the top of the hour, and we're going to pause for 5 minutes, and then we'll come back and get into our second hour here at the Virtual Center. I hope you'll stay with us. Thank you. Welcome to our second hour here at the Virtual Center on this Wednesday. Today is the 17th day of August in the year 2016. It is very, very warm and getting warmer all the time. So I guess I'm warming up with the weather or whatever I'm trying to. Thank you. If you're just joining us, welcome to our program. We are continuing the theme that we've been developing the last couple of days in our program here at the Virtual Center, which is the link between unions or the demise of unions and the rise of Donald Trump. That's been our theme. We've looked at a number of different sources, considered a number of different sources that seem to feed into this particular theme. I introduced in our first hour a fairly lengthy substantive paper on the development of democratic governments throughout the modern world, done by Seymour Martin Lipset, who is a sociologist. This was the presidential address that he delivered in 1993 as president of the American Sociological Association, and it's tied into the social and economic priorities associated with the development of democracy. And what he does in his article is go through all of these new small democracies that began in late in the 20th century throughout Africa and Latin America and Eastern Europe and all the rest of them, and points out how many of them didn't last because they didn't have the legitimacy, the sense of people's commitment to the process, to the idea of participation that is absolutely necessary for democracy to work as we know it. And I think that's been basically his theme, is that in order for democracy to work, there needs to be a viable, developing economy to sustain it. Working people need to be working and need to be able to plan for their future if they are going to buy into the process and become an active participant in it. And that's tied directly to the viability of unions. And when a society, and that's of course what we're talking about, is this has been a priority here in our nation in recent years, when a society makes the commitment to weaken and destroy its unions, as we're seeing among prominent Republicans and employers and the Koch brothers and the American Legislative Exchange Council and the National Chamber of Commerce and all of these other groups that have made the destruction of unions their number one priority, then what you are doing is weakening the vehicle that brings working people into the process and makes them participants. When they aren't there, when that role is not possible, then these people become vulnerable. They become available to the kind of strong demagogic personality like a Donald Trump, who promises them the future that they don't see getting any other way except by supporting this dominant individual. One of the quotes in the Seymour Martin Lipset piece, which pretty much makes the validates the comment I made earlier. Lipset says, capitalist development is associated with the rise of democracy in part because it is associated with a transformation of the class structure strengthening the working class. So basically, if you're going to have a working class, which capitalism obviously requires because that's the production aspect of your economy, then if you're going to make these people feel viable and buy into the process, then you've got to make it feasible and viable for them to buy in. Lipset points out that only 4 of the 17 countries that adopted democratic institutions between 1915 and 1931 maintained them throughout the 1920s and 1930s. 1/3 of the 32 working democracies in the world in 1958 had become authoritarian by the mid-1970s. Think of that. 1/3 of 32 working democracies in the world in 1958 had become authoritarian by the mid-1970s. And of course, the reason for that is the lack of legitimacy or the lack of commitment to the process. And the only way to build that legitimacy, build that sense of commitment, is to make sure that the process works for them. And the only way that can happen is if the economy is strong. And so if the economies are weak, and if there is massive unemployment, then people's tendencies is to believe that the system isn't working for them. And they begin to look for alternatives. And in our case, Donald Trump is offering such an alternative to these people. Here's a statement from Lipset's article, which I have marked as being important, and I think it would contribute to our overall understanding. Lipset says, democracy can be recommended not only on moral grounds, but as ultimately facilitating systemic stability. Democracy enables the citizenry to see the polity, the political system, as including all societal elements, not only those in power. The electorate becomes part of the legitimating structure. It, rather than the government, holds the ultimate authority. Members of the electorate are encouraged to work for changes in government while remaining loyal to the system. They become committed to working with the system and in the system, but only as long as the system works for them. And when the economy tanks, understandably, the system can't work for them anymore. I would suggest to you that's part of the reasons for unemployment and all sorts of assistance, rental assistance and healthcare assistance and assistance for utility rates and all the rest of it, which so irritate working people that these people get it for nothing. The fact of the matter is, this is the system trying to maintain these people until the economy takes over and begins to sustain them for itself. And by itself. Anyway, that's the theme, and that's where we spent our first hour, and that's where I'd like to head in this our second hour as well. I do encourage you to participate in our program by making your voice heard. We have a phone number. It'll get you on the air. Our phone number is area code 304-663-4676. 304-663-4676. My email address, if you'd like to communicate with me in an email, is waobrien906@gmail.com. That's W.A. O'Brien, O-B-R-I-E-N 906 @gmail.com. And again, I do encourage you to check out our Facebook page and do it on a regular basis. I'm sure between the end of our program today and the time that we get back together again on Monday, I will have posted 2 or 3 things on our Facebook page during that interim period. And I'll try to open our programming, our program next week by making specific reference to some of those postings. I'd like to touch in a little bit more detail on something that we mentioned at the end of the hour, just before we took our break at the top of the hour. And that is a comment or two about the changes that have occurred in the Trump campaign since our program yesterday ended. In the last 24 hours, as many of you know, the lead news item on this morning's news was that there had been a major shakeup or a major addition to the Trump campaign. And Donald Trump hired the executive director of Breitbart, the conservative, it's a right-wing group. It's not a member of the Republican establishment. This particular individual is an opponent of the Republican establishment. And a new person to handle the media, 2 new people to manage his campaign. But the most important facet of that is the way that this change seems to connect to things we've been talking about here at the Virtual Center. In bringing in these people over the heads of Paul Manafort, Manafort's job in the short time that he's been campaign manager in the Trump campaign was theoretically to rein in Donald Trump, to kind of make him more acceptable to the mainstream within the Republican Party. Going through my papers here while I speak, and I apologize. Here it is. The 2 people that Donald Trump has added to his campaign since yesterday are Stephen Bannon, who runs Breitbart News, and let me get the name of the other one. I can't remember. I know it's a woman, and a woman, and I can't remember her name, and I apologize for that. But you can see it everywhere. It's all over the news. But basically, what this means is that if you look at the advice that Bannon has been giving Donald Trump throughout the campaign, it is encouraging him to continue to go in the same direction that allowed him to win the primaries. To, in other words, give in wholeheartedly to the idea of letting Trump be Trump. And we've seen all sorts of evidence coming from the campaign that Trump has expressed concern. He feels boxed in. This effort to try to moderate him, to get him to stick to the teleprompter, and to deliver traditional political speeches rather than to run his rallies the way he's been running them, is making him feel unnatural and not himself. He believes that that's the reason the polls are revealing the increase in support for Hillary Clinton that they're showing. He feels that he's been constrained and not allowed to conduct his campaign the way he feels he should do it. And the hiring of these people, basically it is an admission by Trump, a statement by Trump, that he intends to be himself and go his own way, and that no longer is he going to go out of his way to try to appeal to the Paul Ryans and the Mitch McConnells and the leadership of the Republican Party. And so what we know is that prominent Republicans, one by one, have been bailing out on the Trump campaign. What Bannon's advice has been to Donald Trump is let them go. Don't worry about them. When it comes time on election day, when the time comes, they're going to have to vote for you. They're not going to vote for Hillary. So don't worry about them. Don't artificially strain yourself trying to bend your campaign to appeal to them. We're losing support that way. And so basically, the question, the significance of these new people in the Trump campaign is to give him the go-ahead to basically continue to operate and run the populist, appealing directly to the people approach that he believes was so successful in getting him the nomination in the first place. This is extremely significant because what it means is Trump has decided to forego the support of the mainstream Republican Party and instead build on the frustration, the anger, and the alienation that exists in our society. And Trump believes that there's enough of it to win the election. The polls indicate that he's wrong. All the pundits suggest that he's wrong. In fact, Greg Sargent in today's Washington Post, who's one of the best political commentators at the Post, makes the statement in his piece in this morning's Washington Post that Donald Trump seems to be delusional to the point of being entirely incapable of appreciating why he's currently losing to Hillary Clinton. Either that, or he has some diabolical plan to break apart the Republican Party and pocket a big chunk of it for himself for post-election profit and fun. And then Sargent says, I think it's the latter, the former. I think that Trump is delusional. He's being carried away by the enthusiasm of the crowds right in front of him. And there's no way in the world he can win a national election that way. There aren't enough of those people. But with the appointment of Bannon, who has been urging Trump to go his own way and do what got him this far, and not worry about the Paul Ryans and the Mitch McConnells, and to appoint him to head up the campaign, Trump has pretty well made a decision as to how he's going to run his campaign. This is the paragraph from Greg Sargent's piece in this morning's Washington Post that is his spin on this particular change. This appears to confirm, he says, as I have argued, that Trump remains trapped in the mental universe he inhabited during the primaries. That was a place where the size of his crowds at rallies actually did portend victories over less colorful and entertaining opponents who failed to create a mystique to rival his. It was a place where he really could win through sheer media dominance alone, because the bigotry, xenophobia, and all-around depravity and wretchedness that drove that dominance, and with it the name recognition that allowed him to blot out his rivals, did not alienate large numbers of Republican voters in the manner he is currently repulsing key general election constituencies. Trump now appears determined to prove that that same formula, which basically constitutes whipping up white backlash through arousing rallies and a continued emphasis on ethno-nationalism, leavened a bit by pretend minority outreach gestures, can work in the general election. And that's really what the media believes this change in the Trump campaign is all about. That Trump has finally decided that he's not going to waste his time and continue to fall further and further behind in the polls by trying to appeal to the mainstream Republican Party. Instead, he's going to appeal to the group that supports him the strongest. And he's going to go with that and hope it's enough. And so the question is, does he really believe it's enough? Greg Sargent believes that if he does, he's delusional. But lo and behold, the other possibility that Greg Sargent raised at the beginning of his article was that if he's not delusional, then instead he's got a plan. What Sargent refers to as a diabolical plan that pertains not to the election, but to what happens after. He attributes this particular perspective, this particular idea, to Brian Stelter, who's a commentator on CNN. Brian Stelter raised the perspective, which is really interesting. This is what he suggests. That maybe Trump realizes he can't win. And that what he's really begun to do is think what happens after the election. What are some of the things that have happened during this election procedure that aren't really related to the election? One of the major things that's happened in the last couple of weeks is the crash, the shakeup at Fox News. The termination of Roger Ailes for sexual harassment of Gretchen Carlson and a number of other women that have come forward since then. It's a story that Fox News itself has chosen to not even comment on. But the fact of the matter is, there's quite a climate of fear and possible retribution going on at Fox News. But you'd never pick it up from listening to Fox News. If you want to find out about it, go to CNN, because they're covering it. Fox News is not. One of the commentators at CNN is Brian Stelter. And he raises this possibility. The termination of Roger Ailes, who, by the way, has been and continues to advise Donald Trump in his campaign. That there seems to be an opening after the election for the possibility of building a media empire around the people who support Donald Trump. In other words, what Trump's decision to direct his campaign directly toward the people who appeal to him the most, not go after and try to win new voters, but rather try to appeal to the constituency to whom he already appeals, which would seem to be suicide politically, wasting your time directing your campaign at the people who are already going to vote for you. If you want to win the election, you got to bring in new people. Trump's made the decision not to do that. Stelter proposes a possible reason. Maybe Trump realizes that there aren't enough of those people to win the election. But there are enough of those people. He got 10.7 million votes in the primaries. There are enough people, of those people, to form a constituency loyal to him that would still be there after the election. And even though he didn't win the election, he would remain one of the most powerful, influential people in the country because of the power that he had over this sizable group of disaffected Americans. They could really make some noise. They could whip up some trouble. And lo and behold, who are some of the people that are available to the Trump campaign now who could help him in this effort? One of them is Bonner from Bright News that he just hired. Another one is Roger Ailes, who built the Fox News empire. What's to prevent him from helping Trump build a Trump news empire? A media empire. This kind of thinking, I would suggest to you, conforms somewhat to the scenario we've been laying out in terms of the people who support Donald Trump and what the Trump campaign means in terms of the operation of our political republic and what the future looks like for the nature of our two-party system. Basically, Donald Trump has abandoned the model of America's two-party system as it was laid out by the founders and as it has developed through the 19th and 20th centuries. Trump has decided not to appeal to the support of the mainstream Republican Party and make this yet another election of Democrats versus Republicans. He has decided instead to manage his campaign almost as if it were a third-party movement. Breaking out or separating the people who support him from the mainstream party system. Since he is the Republican nominee, he has pretty much made a decision to cut the string, cut loose Paul Ryan and Mitch McConnell and the leaders of the Republican Party. They're going to have to figure out how to deal with Hillary and the Democrats themselves. He's decided what's best for him and what he might be able to do with and for the people who support him. It rings in my mind back to the ideas during the Depression of Father Coughlin and Huey Long in Louisiana, the Kingfish. And these demagogues who were leading significant movements of people. These are the people that Roosevelt believed would destroy the nation, would destroy the American Republic if government didn't find a way to make accommodations and win back some of these people from their loyalty to this kind of a demagogue. This particular situation smacks of that in my mind. And that's pretty much what we've been talking about. The vehicle, one of the vehicles that would be instrumental in winning these people back to the system and to the viability of the system is organized labor, is labor unions. But they've been pretty much decimated. Right to Work has taken care of them. So in essence, how do we compete with Donald Trump? for the loyalty and the support of the people who support him and have thrown in their lot, so to speak, with Donald Trump. And what does this mean to the future of the republic? I know that there are probably some people out there, and this just occurred to me, that are thinking, my God, this sounds like the ultimate conspiracy theory of all time. It's outlandish. It's so bizarre and so extreme that it can't be true. I would be one of the first people to say that. Except that we're dealing with a political campaign that has been so bizarre and so outlandish already that it's been hard for me to believe it's true. We've been surprised over and over and over again so far, to the point that these kinds of things which become remote, which seem to be remote possibilities, become viable probabilities. Because we are dealing with a significant demagogic leader who has been able to use the media to attract a sizable population to him. That is exactly the situation that FDR told us in the early 1930s would destroy the nation if we didn't do something to counter it. His New Deal program was the answer. His New Deal program was institutions, government's way to address the dangers of radicalism and the threat they posed to the American political fabric. We have such a threat now. And what really complicates it is the power and the influence of the media. Trump's ability to totally dominate and control the media. He doesn't have to pay for it. The media is giving it to him free. Not because they support him, but because the competitive business that they're in requires that they can't do anything else but cover him. He's news. He sells advertising. People advertise on the networks that cover Donald Trump. Because Donald Trump is what the people want to see. Donald Trump is the candidate people want to hear. There's absolutely no question that the first debate between Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton on September 26th will be the media event of all time. There's absolutely no question that it's going to attract one of the largest audiences in the history of television. It'll be broadcast all over the world. And we've already seen examples of how frightened leaders around the world are of what's happening in this country and what this campaign is all about. We would be making a horrendous mistake if we fail to take seriously what's going on. The fact that you begin to wonder whether what's going on could really be going on, and whether the implications of what's going on in terms of what it's liable to mean for the nation at large can really be true. The fact of the matter is, it would be a mistake to turn our back on that and basically suggest that's a dream. It can never happen. We're just creating ghosts here. That can never happen. The fact of the matter is, it's happening. We've talked about it. We talked about it for the entire program yesterday and the bulk of today's program so far, and we've got 20 minutes left in today's program. And we've talked about it here as well. I think we would be remiss to decide that it's not real and that it's something we needn't take seriously. I believe it is something we need to take seriously. We have the history. We have the history of the Depression and FDR's, and you remember the hatred and the vitriol that many conservatives in this country brought upon Roosevelt for doing this. Roosevelt's effort to reach out to labor, to working people, and to make commitments to them about retirement benefits and Social Security and health care and protecting their home from seizure for non-pay, for their inability to pay the mortgage and all the rest of it. Many of the things that these people thought were outlandish, Roosevelt believes were absolutely essential in order to make sure that these people didn't go to the Huey Longs and the Father Coughlins of the world. Now they're going to Donald Trump. I mentioned the media article that Horst brought to my attention. Well, he didn't just bring it to my attention. It was on Facebook. But he mentioned my name specifically in the lead-in to it and said, if you haven't read this, you need to. And I did. Basically, it's a recommendation as to how important this article might be, a recommendation from Dan Rather. Dan Rather basically identifies the author of this piece, Ezra Klein, as one of the most insightful, perceptive columnists of the day. And what Klein writes about is journalism. And more specifically, I encourage you to look up this article. If you go to the internet, it is the publication is Vox, V-O-X. The author is Ezra Klein, K-L-E-I-N. The date, August 16th, yesterday, 2016. Basically, the theme that Klein's article focuses on is the relationship between Donald Trump and the media. More specifically, on Trump's allegation that the media is biased against him, that the media is not treating him the way it's treating Hillary Clinton, that the media is using every opportunity in the world to embarrass him and attack him. Klein's position is Donald Trump is right. Klein's position is that there's absolutely no question in anybody's mind that the media is opposed to Donald Trump. At the beginning of the campaign, of the primaries, Trump was a newsmaker. He was cute. He was exciting. He was news. And the media supported him and catered to him to the point, to the degree that the other contenders for the Republican nomination found it impossible to get any coverage. How many times did John Kasich say that, for example? And many of the others who said that they couldn't get heard during the debates. They never got called on. Many of the candidates said that. But the fact of the matter is, once the election came through the primaries and once Donald Trump secured the nomination and began to conduct his campaign, the fact of the matter is many of the things that Donald Trump is doing violate the basic ethical nature of journalism. Dan Rather makes the point that there are certain givens, certain truths, certain absolutely musts of good journalism. Trump is violating them all. He's lying. He's attacking particular journalists. He banned the Washington Post from his rallies. He's called out particular journalists, Megyn Kelly being one, Katy Tur on MSNBC for another. He's embarrassed them at his rallies. He's gone after people like the war hero, the parents of the war hero from the convention. He's violating all the rules of journalism. Klein says that from his perspective, there seem to be four main reasons that the media is operating according to a different set of rules in covering Donald Trump. The first main reason is that both sides are doing it. Not only are Democrats attacking Donald Trump, Republicans are attacking Donald Trump. So the irony is the media always used to play it in the middle, always used to basically make it clear that they had to work with both parties at the same time, that if they went with one party rather than the other one, then they wouldn't get scoops on news. They wouldn't get a chance to cover these things. And so basically, the point Klein makes is that now the Republican leadership is attacking Trump as well. So as far as the media is concerned, the rules have changed. You don't have to make sure that you're being fair to one party in the way you deal, in the way you deal with the other one, because in the case of Donald Trump, both parties are doing it. And so the fact of the matter is, he tells a story. Klein tells a story, and he says, back in the primaries, I published a piece and recorded a video in which I called Donald Trump's rise a terrifying moment in American politics. My analysis was unsparing. Quote, Trump's the most dangerous major candidate for president in memory, I wrote. He pairs terrible ideas with an alarming temperament. He's a racist, a sexist, and a demagogue. But he's also a narcissist, a bully, and a dilettante. He lies so constantly and so fluidly that it's hard to know if he even realizes he's lying. Unquote. After the piece got published, he said, I got a call from a very conservative member of Congress, Republican. He wanted to talk about my article, his office said. I figured he'd be angry. Instead, he congratulated me for speaking out. And then he endorsed Donald Trump. What does that, as Klein's point is, what does that tell us? That secretly he's frightened of Trump, but publicly he's afraid not to support him for fear that he might win. And then what happens? If I'm his enemy, he holds grudges. Once you're his enemy, you remain his enemy. I can't afford to do that. So I've got to make sure that Donald Trump sees me as an ally. So I'll endorse him. But at the same time, I'll contact the author of one of the most vicious anti-Trump attacks I've ever read and tell him what a great job he did. That's what Trump's candidacy is causing to journalists. The second reason that the rules of the game have changed when it comes to journalism is that Trump's conspiracy theories and lies offend the press right to the core of what journalism is about. What he's doing violates all the rules, all the ethical ground rules of journalism. Everything journalists believe good journalism is about, Donald Trump violates. He attacks, he lies, he's singled out, he's vicious, he carries a grudge, he doesn't compromise, he never admits that he's wrong, even when he knows he is. He blatantly contradicts himself and never apologizes for it, etc., etc., etc. According to Klein, press critic Jay Rosen says that this is journalism in reverse. The birth certificate's a good example. When you take a fact verified as fully as it can be in journalism, like Obama was born in the United States, and you say it's not true, it's a lie, energy is released by that. It takes something that's been nailed down and introduces doubt about it to release controversy and chaos. That violates every rule of journalism there is. So that's one of the reasons why journalists are laying into Donald Trump. The third one says, yes, the press is biased, and in a way that's particularly bad for Trump. And the reason is because Trump is appealing to a particular constituency. He's not appealing to the electorate in ways designed to win elections. He's appealing to the electorate in ways which suggest that he's got some other goal in mind, because he's not winning. He's violating all of the rules of politics. And the way that Klein explains it is the issue of cosmopolitanism. In other words, the question as to whether the media is liberal and whether it's biased. Klein's position is, in a way, it is, because it's cosmopolitan. It's based in New York and Washington and Boston and LA and all of those places. Trump's appeal is not to the people in those places. Trump's appeal is to a campaign or a constituency that is conservative and anti-cosmopolitan. Anti-cosmopolitan ideology that runs him smack dab into a deep-seated bias among America's journalists. And the fourth reason that Trump is that the media, the journalists are out to get Trump is because, and this I think is significant, the press is afraid of Donald Trump. Given some of the things he's done and some of the things he's said. Here's a quote. "I hate Trump, and I hope he loses," says conservative commentator Pasquale Emmanuel Gobry. "But I fear one consequence of his candidacy will be an even more biased press in the future. What these people fear is that if he wins, journalism, the media, as it's traditionally operated in this society, will not be operating that way anymore. He believes that Trump has so changed the rules of the way the media covers politics that the best hope for the media is to make sure that Donald Trump can't win. And that means to attack everything he says and everything he does." There's one additional thing that happened in the last 24 hours that I'd like to add to this before we finish up here today. We're at 53 minutes after the hour, so we've got about 5 minutes to go in our time together today. So let me just take a moment to mention this. Yesterday, in one of his speeches, Donald Trump was talking about his campaign. I can't remember where the speech was delivered. Could have been in Wisconsin. I'm not sure. But I picked this up. Nobody else did. I was telling my wife about this morning. And I said, I listened to Donald Trump last night, and I picked up something, and I waited for the commentators to say something, and not one of them mentioned it. And here's what Trump said. And he said, one of the things that I'm committed to in this campaign, one of the things that I want to see happen in this campaign, quote, is a peaceful transfer of power from the powers that be to the people. He went on, but I was stuck on that particular line or that particular comment. The peaceful transfer of power. Because what Donald Trump is suggesting there is that his election is going to mean something different than any of the major party leaders in either party understand or realize. When you think back through history to the idea of the peaceful transfer of power, most societies have been unable to pull that off. In the past, when power shifts from one group's hands or one individual's hands to another, it's always accompanied by violence of some sort. Except in this society. When Jefferson won the election of 1800 over John Adams, as heated and as bitter and as dirty as that campaign was, Jefferson in his inaugural made the point of emphasizing unity in the country and said, we're all Democrats, we're all Republicans. We all have to work together toward a common purpose. And that established the precedent in this country for the peaceful transfer of power. We've had it. Al Gore did it. Al Gore willingly gave up his pursuit of the presidency when the Supreme Court made its decision in the disputed 2000 election and gave the presidency to George W. Bush. His advisors were encouraging him to fight on. And Gore said, no, the best thing for the nation is to end this and to find ways to bring people back together again. So we have a tradition in this country of a peaceful transfer of power. So what was Donald Trump referring to yesterday? He was implying that if he wins, this particular transfer of power is going to be different. And in theory, it could be accompanied with violence. What he was saying to me was, my principal goal is to make sure that the peaceful transfer of power this time remains peaceful. The implication that it might not. And the threat, which we looked at yesterday with the quotes from Breitbart by Roger Stone, that if Trump loses this election, his supporters are not going to take his loss easily. There will be violence. There will be, according to Stone, a bloodbath. Trump, in my mind, was making reference to that yesterday by suggesting, I'm trying to make sure that doesn't happen. I think as we end our program, because we're at 58 minutes after the hour, I think as we end our program for today and end this week's programs, I think that's a good point on which to end. Donald Trump himself was implying that the dangers of a not peaceful transfer of power this time are real. And I hope that we've been able to kick around some of the possible reasons why that might be true. I want to thank you for being with us. I hope that you have a wonderful week and weekend and that we can get back together again the first of next week. But in the meantime, I want to thank you for being with us. This is pretty heavy stuff and controversial stuff, and I hope that I've been able to do a good job with it and a fair job. I don't want to be accused of sowing conspiracy theories and talking about ghosts and straw men and all of those other things. But I do believe that this is very serious stuff, and I hope you agree with me. We're at 59 minutes after the hour. We've got less than 1 minute to go in today's program. Just time to thank you very much for your continued support of this program and for the Head On Radio Network in general. I hope that you'll do everything you can to keep up that support and support Bob Kincaid and his folks. So again, thank you very much for today. Have a wonderful week, wonderful weekend. Be kind to each other, and Lord willing, we'll be back together again at 1 p.m. Eastern Time next Monday. Thank you.